You know, I always wonder how the so-called
That's that is bright. Huh.
It doesn't look like that actually.
No? Awesome. Hey guys, it is November the 20th, and it is a Friday here in DC, and this is, I don't know even what episode of the Good News Podcast this is, but welcome back guys if you're still joining us. Hope you guys are doing well. There's a lot to talk about. Naturally, it's been quite a long time since we had one, so I guess without further ado, we'll just jump right back into it. So I don't know about you, but obviously I think there's a couple of things we should definitely talk about. Refugees, the Syrian crisis right now. People are obviously upset about what happened in Paris.
Yeah.
And obviously our hearts go out to those. But we just wanted to give our little piece on the controversy that exists right now, because there's a lot of things that are not being represented if you look at the mainstream story. Looking at things like even the creation of ISIS or how that came about. What parties are involved in perpetuating ISIS, because clearly it's getting its ammunition, its funds from somewhere, and intelligence organizations around the world know where that's coming from. In fact, they are a party to it if you want to look at the actual roots. There's just been too much coming out about the training of ISIS members, even the inception of the Al-Qaeda, which, as we've mentioned in an earlier podcast, has a lot of State Department fingers in that particular pie, and you can see that going into ISIS at the moment too. People coming out making statements that they had been trained by the State Department. The fact that ammunition is coming through Turkey and Saudi Arabia being sent to these areas. And for me, one of the most damning things is the fact that ISIS has declared the Palestinians an enemy, particularly going after leaders, killing most recently one of the leaders of Hamas. And it just smacks in the face of a pro-Islamic group, especially if they're attacking an Islamic group, as opposed to the Israelis, a group that has been seen oppressing that particular ethnicity for quite some time now. So it's just kind of weird to see that go on, and people to say, oh well, everyone is aware that this is just a rogue state that's emerging of its own volition. No, it doesn't work that way. If you want to go back and see, Putin came out recently in a press conference and made it quite clear. I mean, take it with a grain of salt if you will, it's Putin, but at the same time, a lot of what he said is still valid. Countries are aware of what's going on. You saw how much damage he did in a relatively short number of days. Even more than that, the fact that an attack on the West is still highly represented when the day prior to what occurred in Paris, there was an attack in Beirut where something like approximately 2,000 people were killed.
Oh no, in Beirut it was 40. But
40.
In Africa, during the same time, there was an attack somewhere. I believe it was I believe it was Nigeria, and it wasn't covered by the media at all. There was an ISIS attack in Lebanon that was not really talked about, and it was on the same day as the Paris attacks.
Yeah.
So it really brought forward this idea that the media is very selective on what they cover, and the politicians therefore address the things that actually come up in media and are only addressing a certain number of topics, when really there's all over the world there's kind of a lot of unrest at the moment. So to kind of handpick it based on which conflicts actually result in the most benefit to your country, that's essentially like what's going on here. If we want to step away from the idea of this this conspiracy theory or whatever, if we just look at the idea that when a country is trying to figure out whether or not they want to enter a conflict, as far as the countries that are initially starting it, not entering it as aid or as allies, but when you initially start it, it's about the idea of why are we going into this country, what do we have to gain from the political and the economic structure that the country has. And it's like you've seen this happening for a long time now. So what's happening in Iraq now is something that President Bush, George Bush actually, so Jr. actually called it. And in a press conference that you can watch on YouTube, he kind of pretty much outlines essentially what happened with these Syrian rebels that were armed by the United States, who ended up becoming ISIS. So now the idea that even the Paris attacks are being associated to ISIS, a lot of recent people are coming up around the world and they're bringing a light to the fact that ISIS doesn't have that much power or money to actually arrange for something like this, because it wasn't a spur of the moment thing. It was very well organized, this attack, and it seemed like it was people who were actually from France. So it seems that, you know, within France you have this whole Charlie Hebdo business that happened with the comics and stuff.
Yeah.
So there is certainly tensions around the Muslim and non-Muslim community within that country, based off of the fact that, you know, exercising free rights, you have this extremely controversial piece of comic that actually went into mainstream media. So it's like, you know, I'm not saying that they asked for this. I'm saying that this is a place where we should try to understand why this is happening. A lot of people were trying to put this together, and they're saying, if it's not ISIS, why would somebody born in Paris or born in France do something like this? And I want to bring to you guys something that's not often talked about, which is that prior to this too, you had a large image of Parisians and French people as being, you know, really quick to judge everybody else and to be very judgmental people, right? And having kind of experienced that myself when I actually went through France, I kind of always had that feeling too. Now, something that a lot of people, you know, don't necessarily know about is that a lot of Sikhs, which is, you know, Sikhs is the religion that I used to belong to, Sikhism. So people that follow Sikhism, they were in France and having big problems with this whole head covering issue, right?
Yeah.
So people were saying that you can't have a head covering when you go in public, you can't have a head covering when you're going to this institution or that institution. So you started having all of these rights being infringed on within the country, and it really targeted minorities like, you know, people that practice Islam or Sikhism, and you know, it was crazy. It was something that a lot of people there were very angry about, and it's been affecting the lives of people in that country for a while. So the actual policies and some of the legislation in that country are actually quite racist on their own. So it's like, again, to bring it back to the idea, I'm not saying, sorry, that these attacks are justified in any sense of the word, but the idea is that over there it's not easy for us to understand what is happening in that conflict because we live over here, right? And in the same sense, when there's any other conflict that we're talking about in the media or the news, we don't necessarily have that ability to go there and put ourselves into
Yeah, and I think if we want to scale it back further, I mean, this is naturally, I can understand where criticism might come in saying that this downplays or disrespects the gravity of the incident, and that's not what I'm trying to do here when I say this. But when I look at what's happening, you're right. It's really, if you scale back our interpretation of events around the world, is that all of these are being portrayed to us in the through which an aperture through which we're comfortable seeing it, right? So through a Western lens, and I mean, we can see examples of this around the world. That we always have to be careful of that kind of cultural relativism, and it works both ways. And if you feel that your culture is something that allows people to be what they ought to be, and that, you know, this is something that people should experience sometime in their life, well, that's all well and good for you to say, but it's up to people to decide for themselves. There were a lot of people saying that women were being oppressed because they were wearing a hijab in countries where that was, you know, socially acceptable. That was the norm. Now, naturally, we saw the backlash being women didn't feel oppressed in these countries. They felt that women in the West, for you know, bearing so much of their skin, they felt that these people were oppressed because they are subject to a very, you know, heteronormative society, and so you see examples even as far as female genital mutilation, because some women actually felt that this was a benefit to them because this now allowed them to join this clique of women that have experienced this. And there's an in-group and an out-group, even with something as far as that, and it really still comes back to choice. If two people are consenting to it, there's no reason why that shouldn't be okay amongst them, as long as they aren't hurting or harming anybody else outside of that sphere. Two consenting people can make whatever decision they want, as long as it doesn't hurt other people. I mean, that's just, I don't know how you could really argue that as a liberal or a conservative ideal. It's very, to me, it's a very human idea, right? that's really what we all want at the end of the day. When each one of us tries to express a value and tries to express what what is important to us, it's the ability to do just that without being persecuted for it. In fact, a lot of these minorities stand up because they're simply, I think they are a minority, and they've been pressed to the point where they have to decide whether or not they want to relinquish or adapt, or relinquish or hold on to their own ideas, their beliefs. And when push comes to shove, if you feel strongly enough about something, you'll hold tight. And you can see that the way that works in terms of brain chemistry too. Your higher thinking brain shuts down if you are pressed like that. That's how it works. So if you expect it to be a rational discussion, you can't shout or belittle people into coming to, a safe middle ground. But maybe we jumped on too much of a touchy topic.
No, I mean,
topic to begin with.
the topic that we're actually like going back to and kind of trying to brush upon is that right now the one kind of subject and the one word you're seeing kind of all over media and social media is Islamophobia, right? The fact that at the moment we have this portrayal of Islam that is making it to seem that every Muslim is out to, basically kill anybody that is not practicing their religion and is violent and is jihadist. And it's something that I've had to actually do a lot of correcting people on their opinions of Islam, because it seems that just the amount of misinformation being put out there, so many people are constructing just absolutely absurd opinions. And when it comes down to it, it's what I'm seeing come forth is constantly this topic that people say, if a woman has her head covered, she is oppressed, and we shouldn't allow this and that. But we do actually follow a double standard. If you think about Mother Teresa, who Teresa of Calcutta, who actually ended up being quite a horrifically irresponsible individual as far as human rights. She was taking a lot of money from charity organizations and never really gave it back to the organizations that were providing care, and actually fled to the United States. There's documentaries about her, but she covered her head, right? And she covered her head entirely around her face in essentially the same way that a niqab or a hijab would, and you saw that happening. And that's why that's actually done, because in Christianity they believe that if you don't have, this is written in the New Testament, mind you, right, the King James Bible, it says in Corinthians 1 that if you do not have your head covered, it is as shameful as having it shaved bald, right? And that is being said to a woman. And it's said to a man that a man should not have long hair, right? Because it is not behoving of a male, right? And that's written in the New Testament. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that's written in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, nobody really follows that. Nobody really believes a lot of that stuff, right? A lot of people have tattoos nowadays. We're talking about the New Testament, right? And that's in the New Testament. So you have always these overlaps between these major religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, the Abrahamic religions. And we've been stressing this in previous podcasts. We've been stressing this with friends too, because if any of these religions is being persecuted at the time period, right, it's because of the media, it's because of the mass propaganda out there. And because realistically, when we actually step back and we look at these religions, we see that there is a tremendous amount of overlap. The fact that they all believe in Jesus, they all believe that Jesus will come back during the rapture and raise the dead. That's why a lot of people bury the dead. They all believe that this idea of there being a God, right, like one God, right, and they believe that the rapture is going to happen, the world will end in a way similar to Revelation, right? So even though it's Christians that really believe in Revelation the most, but it's like you have this really overlapping belief systems that are constantly being kind of fought back and forth over, right? So 60 years ago, you had, during World War II, everybody was going after Judaism, right? And that was kind of the propaganda being pushed at that time.
Yeah.
So it's at the moment you have a massive amount of propaganda and media attention on Islam, right?
Yeah, and I feel that's one of the biggest things that people take and use, though, because let's be honest, in just given how busy we all are, among the only things you can generate conversation from, if you want to look like you're educated at all in terms of current events, is you can draw things from the news. Because if that person said it and this many people toe the line, you know you have at least some safety in saying that remark, or at least touting a similar opinion. And I hear people do it all the time. They'll paraphrase what they hear in the news. They'll paraphrase John Oliver too.
They'll paraphrase social media posts.
Yeah, yeah.
I see this happen all the time, and that's why nowadays I hear a lot from people this state of like being just fed up
Yeah.
with social media because they're tired of hearing people that have uneducated opinions constantly berating them, right?
But that's even like it's not even social media too. But you remember like during the run up to the Canadian election, we naturally, if you guys follow Canadian politics, we just elected a new prime minister. Harper's no longer there. Yes. But Justin Trudeau got in, and
we'll come back to that
the
topic.
one thing we at least I constantly heard if I was trying to bring up Canadian politics in my circles, wherever I might be, people would always come back to, and I wasn't touting Justin or anything, but naturally it would come up in the conversation because he's a candidate, but people would point to him and say, well, he's just not experienced.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
but
a
you
bit-
had no idea about his level of political experience until you heard that attack ad,
Yeah.
which said that he had no experience, and so many people just parroting that same phrase over and over and over again. They had no idea that he was actually getting into politics at the same age that Harper did when he started to run, and that's just what happens. People just use it because it's safe, because no one's gonna peg you on it, or at least if it's big enough, it's okay if you're wrong because you're part of such a big group.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the whole point of this podcast now, because we're frankly tired of that. And we know a lot of people are switching over to internet news, and that's fantastic. People are going on Reuters, Al Jazeera, RT, Young Turks, you name it. You just any one of these is a far better alternative to television news. It's all garbage. Even CBC in Canada, there's a lot of great stuff. Radio CBC, perfect. It's
The
great. It's
Fifth
got some
Estate
really cool stuff.
isn't bad.
Fifth Estate isn't bad. It's got some funky stuff going on. It seems time goes by, the more stuff that lasts on television, the more it becomes a little bit watered down.
Yeah.
A little bit becomes like Fox News North. And that's really what we're trying to move away from, because frankly, the discussion, what really starts change is just the discussion changing, and the discussion changes when you and I sit down in the same place and we discuss ideas. It's not when you and I sit and watch Fox News and show up to work the next day and go, oh, hey, did you hear what this happened? Okay, well, it's good. The country's moving that direction, even if I don't like it this way.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And people are going elsewhere for their news nowadays. You're seeing a lot more traffic on internet news, like we mentioned. There's Vice News, there's RT, Russian television news. They have obviously biased opinions towards the Kremlin, but you can get great news about the rest of the world from them. They have the Young Turks is huge, right? They started off with just a small following, and they're killing it now. Everybody's watching every one of their videos. They get 100,000 hits per video a day, right? So the amount
Vice
of
News, look at Vice.
Vice is massive, right? And that's our homie Shane Smith, who's a Canadian, started it up, and now he has two branches. He's got Vice News in New York, and he's got Vice here in Canada still. So it's really the capacity for alternative news is really amazing nowadays. You see that Jon Stewart kind of actually brought forward this whole late night kind of alternative news kind of thing, right? So John Oliver came out of that. You saw other
And
people.
that's been huge.
John
especially-
Oliver's huge, right? So we are huge fans of his. Every single week he puts out, a 22-minute video. Likes to put out some web exclusives and stuff too. So he puts footage and stuff just for people that check out his YouTube page too. And it's really amazing because people are adopting this modern social media generation, because it's really, as we are getting to know it, it's changing and evolving, right? So you have to kind of stay pace with it. So this whole Canadian politics thing, we never really got a chance to talk about it during the elections. During that time also, though, you had the niqab issue coming up. You had Islamophobia being spread throughout the nation in the form of conservative propaganda.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like the more and more west you come over here in Canada, you see that the country gets more and more progressive.
Yeah, in fact, North Vancouver just saw BC pass a law wherein gas pumps now have to include climate change stickers on the pumps, which is pretty amazing. It's a bit like that huge decision to have the actual showing of negative health effects on cigarette packets.
Yeah.
So I mean, that'll be interesting to see where that goes. And but you're right, it's just about the consciousness of the people, and really in areas where people have what they need, and they have the information at their disposal. I think you can examine the trends. People become more and more inclined towards just general open-mindedness
Yeah.
and bettering of the environment and so on and so forth. And
And also, like, it seems like the biggest quarrel that people will have with politics is that you don't really have representation of your people in politics, of your community in politics. However, now our new Canadian cabinet, which we're still very hopeful and very optimistic, we're keen to see what the changes that they're actually laying into place are actually going to look like. But you're seeing massive changes like the Kits Bay opening back up and stuff too. You're seeing things that the Liberal government said they were going to do actually going into effect.
Such as they're apparently slowly bringing about the fact that they're going to change it from a first past the post system to a proportional representation
Which
system.
is huge. The first past the post system is a system that it resulted in the Green Party, which receives 500,000 votes, right?
Yeah.
In total, the Green Party received 500,000 votes, but their total representation in Parliament for the 500,000 Canadians that voted for Green Party, they got one seat in Parliament, which is Elizabeth May, right? Sandwich, BC.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's really not...
That's small potatoes.
So that's why first past the post is really something that poli-sci classes have been talking against for the last 20-25 years, and we've known that it's not been an efficient system in the countries that
and other Western countries have acknowledged that it doesn't represent the needs of the population as a whole at all. It's limited. It's what's allowed our previous prime minister to stay where he was for as long as he was.
Yeah.
So it's just, but I mean that's the nice thing. I mean, to dial it back, man, just conversationally, everything appears to have that trend of moving towards a state that's representative of what's easiest for people, what's best for people. Technology was moving that way. People decided before legislation was in place that they're sick of the drug wars. The drug war is insane. It's completely insane. It's entirely insane to prop up an industrialized prison system at the expense of the taxpayer. Not to mention all the costs you incur keeping people in prison that simply don't belong there at all for minor drug offenses. And this is just in the U.S. alone. Canada has its own issues. But people decided, we're sick of this. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. And if you ask any lawmaker to make sense to you, what was her, the head of the DEA at the time, she couldn't distinguish between whether marijuana was worse than heroin. Let that sink in.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen Harper during his campaign said that cannabis is infinitely worse.
That's a verbatim quote.
Infinitely
tobacco. Worse than tobacco.
Right, and so marijuana, the term even, I'm trying to get away from using it in my vernacular, and it's like because at the moment, like, we've forgotten what exactly that cultural phenomenon came from. Marijuana is actually a term that was used to imply racial connotations to cannabis, so that people would assume that it was only Mexicans, black people that would smoke it, right? So it was this racist term, and you see it on signs here, medical marijuana, and it's on our legislation too, where we should really be calling it cannabis, right? And it's like, so that stuff, and really the main thing that was astounding right now was that in our cabinet that Justin assigned, you have an ex-Afghanistani refugee, right, that is serving in our cabinet, right? So in a time of Islamophobia, right, you have that, right? You have our transportation minister has been to space, right? You have our defense minister, right, is a bearded Sikh, right? That looks like what Al Qaeda was labeled as a long time ago, right? I used to look in the same way, and I never would have thought that somebody could represent us in Parliament on such a high level as defense minister, with that specific way of looking, right? But he's highly decorated, three tours in Afghanistan, one in Bosnia, right? And he has so many compliments from the U.S. Marines. They said that he was an absolutely invaluable resource that the Canadian military has, right? So you also have we have a which other ministers do we have? There's a couple of other ones that are pretty interesting. The way our science minister, how about that one? Our science minister, I don't know if you know this one, Nobel Peace Prize winner. Okay, so that's what's happening in Canada, right? So when people asked Justin Trudeau. They said, why did you decide to have 50% of your cabinet being
Yeah.
women? His answer was smug, but it was very on the point. He
Because
said,
it's 2015.
right, that's it. That's all you have to say. Because we as people have expanded and changed our way of thinking, our representation in Parliament should follow suit, right? And it should have really gone along with it, or politicians should have represented us before the people change perspective. But nowadays, what I've been saying to a lot of people, I've been kind of echoing the same words in different variations. But I have it as efficiently worded as I possibly can now, which is that politicians fight tooth and nail against progressive change until it's inevitable, and then they take credit for it.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like nowadays you're seeing that people, the politicians here are getting their money into the cannabis industry, and LPs and these ones have politician money in them, right? And that's why that market is being pushed. Instead of allowing for people to grow in their own dwellings and make their own medicine, they want you to buy from the government and actually give taxes back, right? So it's ridiculous. You see everywhere people want to establish monopolies. Oregon decided against their legislation scheme because the people said that it's going to allow for monopolization. That stupid Nick Leahy guy from that Jessica Simpson show, whatever it was, that guy was going to have a monopolized chunk in the market, right? And they're like, this guy doesn't even have anything to do with the cannabis community, and apparently he's going to come in and just like make a shitload of money on people, right? So in a market where you do have, even though medical to a lot of people was just the way to get cannabis into the society, what people realized along the way was it can be used to treat everything. So there is a long list of medical applications that are now available for cannabis. So that makes it really hard, because if you're going to legislate a legalized market, which is what the Liberals intend on doing now, they're going to break international drug laws, right? United States has not broken those laws and has actually the one that would actually be enforcing them most of the time. But now that they're being hypocritical with state legislation and state taxing, other countries are like, what the hell? We need stimulus to our economy too, and you guys are actually doing it now. So you have Mexico preparing to legalize, Canada preparing to legalize, Uruguay already legalized. They were a small country, so they weren't targeted by the United States, right? You have India preparing to legalize. They are now aligning themselves with the United States military, so that if they decide to legalize cannabis, and if they decide to research free energy research, they will not be, threatened by these other
India
interest
partnered
companies.
itself with Russia.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
I
I got off the OPEC nation. Circle.
So yeah, it's a crazy time right now for alliances being kind of broken around the world, and you're seeing a lot of change happening as far as a red movement occurring, right? The Liberals are taking over, and they've taken over Parliament and have a majority government in Canada. You have Bernie Sanders, who's the Democratic Socialist representative. Right, and socialist is a word that nobody would have even dared to have mentioned 10 years ago, but nowadays Bernie's actually making people feel the burn, right? So it's like Bernie Sanders is coming down there, and he has a possibility of taking the Democratic primary, which would be amazing. Fuck Hillary, right? We don't need Hillary Clinton. She would be a worse war president, worse than the Bushes, right? So then we also have a lot of just change that's happening as far as losing your train of thought every now and then, and you can slip it to Graham.
But the point, I think it's really important to say though that if we refer to politicians as a mark of social change, really they're kind of indicative of they're like sort of a barometer for what's going on. It's not like they are the source of it, and I think that gets mistaken a lot. So when we look at people like Justin Trudeau and Bernie Sanders there's some funky stuff going on there too. I mean, the fact that he's, some of his contributions come from the Israeli lobby, and he's not willing to really talk about that. That's sketchy. And I know that Justin's got skeletons in the closet too. Let's be honest. Any personality that's big enough to think it can control a population, or at least guide a population, lead a population, there's something up there. Nobody's without a vice, and I think that's important to recognize. You're not going to see these people as being the bulwarks of the values we want to hold necessarily, because they really just, they're the face that the public wanted to wear for that particular time. They're that particular mask.
And that's why, it's not really about the leaders so much that we're saying nowadays, right? We're talking about the collective change in, in what people want and what people expect from their government. in what, if people ask us how do you expect to have change in something like the education system or the political system or the prison system, they always try to stump us nowadays. But me and Graham have actually been kind of trying to make sure that we do our research, so when people come at us with those questions,
Yeah.
we can make examples.
Yeah.
And like, Finland, right? Like Finland, like having complete educational reform, or other Scandinavian countries having, social programs that actually help their people.
And more than just that, they're able to take care of waste so well in their own countries that they make a significant amount of money from shipping waste in from other countries so that they can process it. That's how well they're managing at the moment. And yes, we would call those wealthy countries because they've managed to put a few things together, and they don't have the populations that certain other countries deal with. You made the excellent point the other day of saying that India has a tremendous amount of people, huge, right? About 1 billion, is it? And we still see corruption in their politics, right? And that's, you think, okay, with 1 billion, that seems about right. In America, you have a fraction of the population, 365 million, is it now? Maybe it's a little bit bigger than that. But you have a tremendous amount of corruption in their government. Now, we have 37 million in Canada, I believe now. 37 million, we still enjoy corruption here in Canada too. And it's perplexing to see that continue down the line. Who amongst doesn't have corruption? Well, it's obviously in governments where they've got a pretty good hold on the people. They have an excellent propaganda system. This is where you can see corruption coming into them to play more.
Exactly, but when you see it going that far down the line, like what does that mean at the end of the line? Does it mean that like Luxembourg and Vatican are, oh wait, they are fucking corrupt as shit, right? And it's like, that's exactly what the situation is. It doesn't matter if you have, it seems that if you have two people, right, running a nation, one of them is probably going to kill the other person and run the nation, right? So, no, I'm not even going to say just one of them is going to be corrupt. It seems, it's strange in that sense. That's why the Magna Carta, which was written ages ago, stated that absolute power corrupts absolutely, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in that sense, we've seen that kind of perpetuated around the world. But as I was saying, though, the idea of this red wave that's coming, it is coming. Like, if people's minds perspective is going more progressive, less conservative, more left wing, less right wing nowadays. And you're like we saw a massive win in Canada, right? And that's not, and sure, like if anything, in spite of Justin being the leader, right? They actually still won, because the amount of berating of like attack ads that they had on Trudeau, like it almost seemed like having him as a leader was actually almost harmful to the Liberal Party. But the people decided that they wanted the current government out. They wanted change. They wanted the people to actually have more of a word again.
And I think that's I think that's also indicative, if I might cut in, it's also indicative of the people just being ready to being afraid doesn't work anymore. Being afraid informs policies that are just terrible for everybody.
Yeah.
It informs terrible foreign policy. It informs terrible domestic policies in terms of a police state and stronger and stronger reliance on non-renewable resources. It's not sustainable anymore, and people are just making the choice based on the fact that they're willing to stare the problems in the face, or at least we're willing to start. We're willing to start taking responsibility for ourselves, and we're willing to try, or at least try and say that, okay, maybe we have more power than we thought, because really that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Collective action. Any government that sees more collective action from its people sees less corruption. And generally it's a better situation for all involved, for the countries that the country trades with, as well as its own population. And you see this, for instance, in Quebec. People are very willing to protest. People are very willing to voice their opinions about legislation that they're not happy about. And for that reason, you see legislation works very different in Eastern Canada in the way that it applies to Quebec, because they're quite vocal. In BC, we're a lot more relaxed. We enjoy a lot of cake, and we just tend to sit down on a lot of things. Naturally, there is a lot of activism, and it's terrific, and I think it informs a lot, and we see it really coming out through a lot of what BC has done. But I think we could also stand to be a lot more active about more and more important social issues. I mean, you saw us get upset about the Canucks, and that was a really foolish riot, in my opinion. We still saw a lot of people come out for Occupy, and I think ultimately, regardless of whether you agree on the fundamental issues, people got together. People were willing to stand up and say, well, this affects more than just me, so I'm going to stand up and say that. And I think for that reason alone, it's worth recommending or both reading into and trying to understand. the biggest issue that we all encounter is just that we tell ourselves that we know the story. We know the story, and maybe we're not clear on all the facts, but we tell ourselves that because, who knows? Pick whatever excuse we want. We're too busy, or I don't need to know enough to argue with a simple person, or I don't need to know more than I do to be comfortable with where I'm at. Granted, but if you feel you have the freedom to express yourself and to influence the sphere around you, I think every one of those freedoms comes with the responsibility to inform that decision. So you need to know why your opinion is the way it is. Is it okay to share it with other people? And maybe ask yourself the difficult question: how entitled are you to your own ignorance? How entitled are people to their ignorance?
Yeah.
This is all something that you need to really bring out in yourself before we actually see any substantial change in our community.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that it's going to be a double-edged sword when it comes to social media, right? We talked about the fact that there's a lot of opinions out there that aren't well informed, but when I use Facebook, I'm able to kind of share a lot of stuff that I find inspiring, just amazing, or awe-inspiring, and I share them with people that out there, like, somebody will share something, I will reshare it. It'll be a quote, a video, a short blurb, whatever. And you can surround yourself with people in your social media network that actually allow you to get inspired every day. And when I say that, I legitimately, every day, usually receive one thing on my social media feed, which actually ends up leading to some type of inspiration for me, right? So, the thing is, though, it is true, absolutely, that with Facebook being an example of one of the templates, you really don't have all of your stuff being shared to everybody that's on your friends list. So I think that, in the future, hopefully there is alternatives to this kind of stuff. It is important to stay informed. That's kind of the message today, is that these things like Islamophobia, the people turning away refugees, it's a lack of empathy. It's a lack of it's obviously points towards ignorance and a lack of knowledge on the subject. So it's really about staying informed. And we mentioned a few different media outlets that are great out there right now. Obviously, it's a lot of stuff that we've dropped today, and it's great to get back out there and actually be doing these podcasts again. I'm really happy after today's podcast, because just seeing the potential be there fully, and seeing that me and Graham can bounce back and forth like a good tennis match. It's still an art form that we're trying to figure out, and we're still going to keep evolving, and we don't know where this is going to go. We might even, like we were talking about earlier, change the name or whatever. And it's like, at the end of the day, this is huge. The fact that I was watching it at about halfway point in this, and I was seeing that, I was just watching Graham talking. I'm like, the skills that we're developing from this are really, really beneficial when it comes to, I've seen it in my interviews and stuff, that this podcast helps me, right? So
yeah, that's kind of the thing at the end of the day. Like, ultimately, we started this with the idea of being able to help other people. That's the dream, right? Get paid to help other people.
Yeah.
But frankly, at the end of the day, now still that we're just beginning, we see a lot of benefits in our own lives. It's amazing how empowering it is to just to engage in conversation with yourself about ideas. Because it's not easy to have we're sort of talking to this right now, but it's also, you want to talk with this, but when you're talking with something impersonal that's not giving you any feedback, you develop a lot in terms of thinking on your feet.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. It's helped me in school, for better and for worse, depending on if you're a prof or a student or not. My ability to bullshit is getting pretty phenomenal, just in terms of the other day we got assigned to do a project, and I spaced on the date exactly, and I found out that on the particular day that I showed up to class for an exam, I actually had to do a stand-up presentation for 15 minutes. But because I've been doing podcasting for a bit now, and I sort of understand just how to glaze over conversation, I was able to just freestyle it and wound up getting an A+, which I'm still flabbergasted by, but it's ridiculous. But yeah, it's helped us tremendously. But again, bottom line, you guys are what we're doing this for. If this helps to inform you, if you feel as though we're not, being pretentious or talking down to anybody, and this is stuff that you can practically apply, maybe it's a helpful reminder to you, then great. We're really happy to hear that. We're always open to new suggestions and ideas.
Yeah, and again, it's not really to bring light to what we're doing here in the podcast. What I was trying to say was, if you ever get just a creative spark in your head, or want to do something artistic, whatever thing it is, whatever form it is, get out there and just like flex your artistic muscles.
Yeah, that's right. I guarantee you'll feel better.
Yeah,
You'll
so
always feel better about it.
For us, I didn't know what to expect from this podcast or from this specific outlet for us, but it ended up doing a lot of good for me that is not directly relatable to our connection that we established with you guys. So thanks a lot, guys, for tuning in and for helping us along this whole journey and our development process. And that's pretty much my out. I don't know if you have any more words to say before we go out here.
Yeah, just simple stuff, man. Like, we don't know you guys necessarily, but we wish you the very best. We're all in this together. This really can be as fun as we want to make it. And I know that there's going to be a lot of challenges ahead of a lot of us. A lot of us has exams coming up. Good luck if you're a student. Good luck if you're somebody that's dealing with a student that's going through a hard time. Just be gentle with yourself. Give yourself a break. Give everybody a break. Better than that, give everybody love, because we're all deserving of both. Even though we have hard times and we make bad decisions sometimes, but come on, that's what learning is all about. And yeah, with that, guys, take good care of yourself. Love you guys. Thanks for tuning in again.
Peace and love, everyone.